There we go. Just checking with our online folks if you can hear me. If I can get a thumbs up or a nod that we're good to go. All right. I'm not sure that anybody online is responding, so we'll assume that that is good to go because there's more of you here than there are online. So with that, we will move on to our first introduction slide. All right. Mike, do you want to go ahead and kick things off?
Yeah, so thank you for coming to our workshop today. My name is Mike Scholl. I'm the Economic Development Lead on team for Ayers Associates, and Matt is our Vice President and planner. He's my boss, so I'm really good. We are Ayers Associates. We're a multidisciplinary firm, which just means we do a lot of different things. Everything from kind of planning, economic development, through a lot of environmental work, into engineering, a lot of different transportation engineering, whole range of disciplines. I think Matt can probably speak to it more, a little more depth than I can. You want to?
Yeah, sure. So I came out of the municipal planning world, was an implementer of brownfields. Ran 2 or 3 different brownfield grants in a downtown area in conjunction with our local Main Street. So both of the topics of this conference are near and dear to my heart in terms of implementation, and understanding that they are oftentimes 2 different worlds is an important thing to be able to fully implement and understand the strengths of Main Street, the strengths of brownfields, and how they can work together. So our firm, as was mentioned, is purpose-built for brownfield and Main Street implementation. We have community planners, we have economic developers and grant writers, we have the environmental scientists, as well as landscape designers to be able to illustrate the concepts and ideas that are so important to inspiring brownfield redevelopment. So one of the things that we really focus on is moving projects from concept to construction. And today's session is really focusing on the importance of thinking like a developer. That isn't necessarily a natural skill set for folks that are either Main Street professionals or brownfield folks. It's kind of the next evolution of thinking and figuring out how to move projects forward. So Mike's been through the development process a number of times on some projects. We're going to walk through some examples from him, some of the lessons learned that he can bring to the table, and hopefully elevate everybody's understanding of how to get a project from hey, I think this building would be an awesome brewery, to the actual ribbon cutting of opening that type of a business. So that's a little bit about us. There you go. Is that working?
So before I just asked for one indulgence, and I apologize in advance. Does anybody know where this is? West Virginia is very near and dear to me because this is Seneca Rocks. I proposed to my wife on this platform. So when I came back, my wife had to go through all of her photo albums and said, "You got to show them the picture. You got to show them the picture." This is the picture she wanted you to see. This is me. This is me 2 minutes after I proposed, and I was so nervous that I was afraid I was going to say no. And she was really happy. I was about to throw up. And it was at night, and we realized we walked up to the sunset on Seneca Rocks, and then I stupidly realized that I probably should have had a flashlight for the trip down, which I didn't. But then a year later, we got married, and now we're 23 years in and 2 kids. I'm sending a kid to college next year, so everything worked out. So anyway, thank you for that, and I just wanted to share that little tidbit about myself. Went through this already. So, and it looks like some folks have already started to answer, but first off, before we get going, we just wanted to learn a little bit about you, where you're coming from, and who our audience is today, so we can kind of tailor some of our comments and some of our insight. So if you could take a minute and kind of just let us know where you're from. I think that'd be great. We'll leave this up for a second. There's a follow-up question that I want to ask as well. You can hit multiple ones as well. You can hit if you kind of represent different agencies and stuff. Feel free. It's not. There's no real science.
I'm interested. We've got a lot of other folks that are maybe not representing Main Street or brownfields. If you're in other category, do you want to throw out what that category is?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Statewide Land Bank.
Okay. Nonprofit. What kind of nonprofit? Awesome. Awesome. What else?
Extension service.
Extension.
Program to the community government.
Any others? Okay. Fantastic.
You're all kind of interested, which leads into the next question. What do you hope to gain from this workshop?
The question update or?
Yeah, questions should update. A little bit of lag time. Oh, and online, we've got an economic development organization as well.
While you're kind of answering the question, one of the things that one of the things I think about our firm and about me in particular is a lot of us have worked where we haven't been lifetime consultants. We've come out of the public. I spent 3 decades of my career in the public sector on your side doing city economic development and redevelopment. And I've only been a consultant for the last couple of years. So I think it's helpful when we can bring a little bit of insight when we've been on that side of the table in understanding some of the pressures we're feeling and the challenges. So we think that we have a little bit of a unique perspective. So looks like got a few people want to learn to be a developer. That's awesome. I love that. You got a property. You're struggling to attract development. You want some insight. That's great. There's a few people that is there anyone want to share what their other? You don't have to. It's okay. You know, I promise I won't show any more of my family pictures. Yeah, go ahead.
Or affordable housing development, but we do see a lot of brownfield space to learn from the other perspectives.
Oh, awesome. Cool. She's a bag, so you should get to know her. Bags are very important. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. So cool. So great. I think this is kind of about what we expected. So I think it's great. It'll play right in kind of what we're shooting for. So before we get going, we just have a few takeaways I wanted to share. And part of it, I think you kind of answered a little bit of the question, but we try to teach you how to be a developer, not because you may become a developer, but because you work in the development world. And I think it's important that you understand the perspective of a developer, or if you want to take on a project yourself, because in a lot of communities, we work in a lot of communities where smaller rural communities where bringing a developer in is not an option. They're just not there. I mean, the market was there, developers would be coming, and so sometimes you have to figure out how to be your own developer, and that could be through an authority, through a land bank program, or through a municipality or ministry, and figure out how to find that pump and kind of get things moving in your community. So we really want to help you demystify it. We want to empower you. So one thing I'm going to point out is I'm a bit of a spreadsheet dork. So again, my apologies in advance. I love my spreadsheets. I walk you through part of the second half of the presentation is I walk you through kind of a financial pro forma real estate analysis that I have formatted that we have for you. So you could take one with you, take it back to your community, start plugging in numbers. I'll explain to you kind of where you get them, how you derive them, how things work together. And then you can go back and do your own financial analysis and see what's happening in your real estate. So we've got those up here. We're going to provide them to the conference, so they'll be online. There's some fun drives if you want to grab them and search one. And also the slides of the PowerPoint that kind of help you work through it. So we want to help you, give you the strategies, give you the opportunity, empower you to do your own financial analysis. and help you kind of understand or translate what's happening in your market and hopefully make some positive change. So I had just a quick primer before we get started, and I think somebody asked the question, you know, do you have that one building in your community? I mean, everyone has, I'm guessing, if you kind of nod, if you tell me that there's one building, if you just knew if you could redevelop, it would make such a huge difference. And it's been there for, I don't know, 5-10 years. And you're not, you know, you're not sure where to start. Well, this was my building in the community. I worked in a mid-sized community in Colorado. This was a dry cleaner. The owner walked away. The bank didn't want to foreclose. It had been leaking. You can kind of see where the tree is. Did a little bit better. There was a blue liquid that's not seen shade, not seen in nature, that was leaking. And this is right in the heart of our downtown. So you drive into our downtown, the first thing you see is a boarded up dry cleaner that the bank doesn't want to foreclose on. They're about to walk away from it. And so I had to go to our city council and say, you know, hey, we should buy this building. They're willing to sell it to us for $50,000. And they said, you're absolutely nuts. Like, why would we buy this building? And part of it is being able to articulate opportunity costs, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. Opportunity cost is really important when you're considering it's the cost of doing nothing. When you're working in the community, because every time, you know, when you go in front of public boards, they want to know how much it's going to cost to do all this, how much it's going to cost. Like, you have to be able to answer how much it's going to cost to do nothing. Well, how much of a drag is this building going to be on our downtown, our local economy? If you leave it standing, there's a massive eyesore that needs cleanup. And if anybody's ever done a dry cleaner, this was a gas station dry cleaner, so double win, a lot of fun. But I was able to kind of convince them that, hey, it's worthwhile. If you don't, what you're doing is, if you don't take it on now, you're kicking that can down the road for 10 years to another city council. And meanwhile, you're dragging the economy of your downtown down for 10 years. And you're losing all that opportunity for revenue. So this is what we were able to build. This is a first run movie theater, which was great in the moment, but when it opened 6 months before COVID, maybe wasn't as impactful. However, it's been very successful. Where the picture's being taken, actually, we extended the footprint. It's a huge public plot. We have a big public plaza now for concerts. Actually, we get now to the point where we're getting, before we'd be lucky to get a couple hundred people downtown, we're getting 1,500 on a Wednesday night for concerts and stuff. And my predecessor has done a great job kind of programming it. So keep in mind, so now instead of having a dry cleaner, which, you know, we had to go dig 19 feet down of dirt and remove the VOCs and ship it off to we followed all the rules, found 3 additional underground storage tanks, which was fun. That weren't, you know, nobody had any record of it. But again, if we hadn't taken that step, hadn't accepted that risk, we wouldn't have had this. And this is part of the larger event. I won't get into the details, but it was there's a residential mixed use development component. But the footprint of that theater was, or the dry cleaner is now this dine-in first run movie. So when you start to talk about and think about development, and you get into your community and you start to talk to your boards, you can't do it. It's too risky, right? Have you heard that? You know, we can't. We're scared. What happens if it goes wrong? What happens if we buy the building and we can't find it? You know, you hear these things, and you hear every reason why you can't take a project. Oh, it's complicated. You know, Mike, we can't because it's got environmental issues on that dry cleaner. What are we going to do? You know, and you hear all of these different things, but really the challenge is to be able to get to yes, because you're going to hear no. You're going to hear no. You're going to hear every reason in the book why you can't take something on. You know, you'll hear, and I think I want to be clear about it. I understand why. When you're dealing with public bodies are inherently risk averse. Developers, which I'm going to teach you how to be, inherently risky. So they don't necessarily align. But I think to the extent that you can help nudge the public sector, the public body a little bit, I think will help you get some stuff done. Because I think, again, you know, if we couldn't have done that dry cleaner, we couldn't have had this big impactful project. And so kind of thinking about it in those terms, I think is really important. And again, opportunity cost. Remember that, use it. It's always the cost. There's always a cost to do nothing. You know, if somebody says we can't take it on, it's too big, it's too messy, there's too much asbestos, there's too many underground storage tanks, lead paint, whatever. But there's a cost to doing nothing and leaving it. And so be prepared to answer that question, because it's a great response to that no, when people say no. The other thing that I'll tell you, and feel free, I've got these little kind of phrases. Matt always teases me about them. He calls them my Mike-isms, but feel free to steal them. I have no pride of authorship, but one of the things I tell people in communities is we are in the forever business. Developers will take their return, you know, in 3 and 7 and 10 year time frames. But when you work in a community, you work for a city, you work for a main street, you work for a municipality, you're in the forever. You're doing 50-year projects, hopefully even more, 100-year project. You're taking your return over a lot. You're creating legacies in your community. So to the extent that you can do these projects or take on that challenge, you know, I think is important that, you know, that remember, you are in the forever business. It's one area where I diverge a little bit with developers, because developers are like, you know, I'm 7 years and I'm out and I'm going to go, you know, buy a house in somewhere, vacation home. But, you know, in communities, you're in the forever business. And so keep that in mind when you're working on some of these projects. So I hope now that I've convinced all of you that you're ready to start your development organization, start developers, and you want to know where you start. So we try to structure this in a way to kind of help you find the front door. If you've been a seasoned developer, if you've done projects before, some of this will be repetitive. But if you've not, and you really want to figure out, okay, where do we start? This is what kind of we're focused on and trying to help you with. First off, I want to go through just a high-level overview of the real estate development process. First off, develop a concept. This is really important. If you're choosing to do something, choosing to act as your own developer, or if you're going out to act or try to attract a developer or an investor, what are you selling? What does that finish line look like? Everyone said, I saw some nodding heads and said, yeah, we have that one building. Tell me, ask yourself, if you were able to get that building and redevelop it, what would it be? Can you answer that question? Would it be residential? Would it be commercial? And heck, would it be just demolished in public space? So think about, be able to answer that question. The second step, test the market. Does it make sense? Do you need more residential? Do you need commercial? What are the lease rates? What's the level of demand that you have? I mean, go out and ask people, you know, go on Craigslist or go on apartments.com or wherever and find out, what are people charging for rent? Talk to brokers, figure out, you know, what are commercial lease rates? Who's interested in leasing? Have that, you know, build up that kind of that bank of information so that when you do get those opportunities, you're prepared to move forward. Evaluation, preliminary design, or due diligence. So these are some of the items that the variables that will come into play with my spreadsheet that I talked so lovingly about later. These are the inputs that you'll start to take and you plug into the spreadsheet to help kick out that financial analysis. And what I'm talking about is, you know, the preliminary evaluation, the due diligence. You know, what is it going to take? You know, if you got a site with asbestos, how much is it going to take? You know, what do you give, you know, rough estimate? If it's a building you're trying to rehab, what are the ADA requirements that you're going to have to build in? You know, are you going from a commercial building to a residential or residential to commercial? You know, what are those cost pressures that you're going to feel? And I'll explain to you how you can start to plug them in and to start building up that analysis later. And then financing, bank loan, incentive grants. That's why I was happy to have a bank here. Banks are, Jesse James said, why do you rob a bank? It's because that's where the money is. You're going to need some, no matter how much you do a project, how many incentives you do, you're still going to probably need some financing. I'm doing a project now. It's a 20-unit affordable, attainable housing project in a rural community in Colorado. And part of it, we have all the grant money, but the problem is the grants reimburse quarterly. But if you've ever done projects, general contractors reimburse monthly. So it's a cash flow issue. So we have to go get a line of credit or do different things to kind of manage that. So banks, they're good. You know, work with them, know them. The next part is permitting and entitlements. And then construction, the fun part when you get into construction. I won't dwell on this one, but if you do get to this point, and I hope you all do, get a good owner's rep. That's my only recommendation, because the construction period is the most stressful and risky time in a project. And then you're leased up in occupancy. That's your final. That's the fun part. You get to do the ribbon cutting and celebrate. And from beginning to end, this is about a 2-year process. If everything goes well. I remember when I started at the community I worked in, they hired me to do redevelopment. And I kind of gave my pitch about, you know, control the real estate and do all the development. And a city council stepped up and said, okay, Mike, we hear everything you're saying. We want our first groundbreaking in 2 months. And I was like, oh crap, what am I doing? You know, so understand, and I say that kind of jokingly, but it's important to make sure you understand the time frame and you can set those expectations properly, because it does take time. You know, financing, I'm working on a loan, helping a community with a loan for affordable housing, and it's the lender said, you know, it's a 6-month kind of period of due diligence before we can close. So just keep that in mind. The other thing, from Matt, you want to touch on this one real quick?
Yeah, do we have EPA people here? Anybody from EPA? Oh, wow. Okay. So assessment grants, anybody running an assessment grant right now? Okay. So the first 4 steps of this process easily and neatly fit within a brownfields assessment grant. These are all activities that can be paid for through your assessment grant. It doesn't just have to be phase 1, phase 2 type of activities. You can do the concept renderings. You can do a economic pro forma on how is the rate of return going to be on this project. You can start to look at different due diligence items, including structural assessments. We're working on trying to convince EPA to allow us to do a LiDAR scan of an old mine site. Haven't gotten there yet, but we'll get there eventually.
Conceptual designs with, we have a landscape architect or some landscape architect part of our group, and they've done renderings and stuff for each project.
We've done a streetscape plan, streetscape corridor plan for a Main Street area, because it would generate redevelopment opportunities for the brownfields on adjacent sides. So there are a whole lot of opportunities that you can use those brownfield grants for, including resource road mapping of identifying additional grants, incentive packages. So getting into that financial side of things, even if you're not running an assessment grant on your own, the technical assistance to brownfields program, and Ray, I think, is part of that effort, can provide a suite of these services as well. So talk to the state, talk to those technical assistants for brownfield centers, because more likely than not, they can assist you with either finding a way to get these types of steps taken care of without having to use your local resources.
This might be a good time for us to just pause for a second. Is there any questions or anything? Going through it.
Don't know if that's good or bad, but
Oh, you would ask that question. It's been over a decade. I have to go back and look. I remember. I don't remember exactly, but a lot of it had to do with both the opportunity, the estimates of what the revenue would generate from the project site itself, plus a negative factor on what the impact it would have on the buildings, just kind of to the north of that site as you come in terms of the opportunity to redevelop. So I'd have to maybe talk to me afterward. I have some mind strategies or how you, what's important in your community, property tax or sales tax, and think about how that kind of creates some the formulas to think that through. But that's a good question. The opportunity cost is not.
Noted. In the next evolution.
Yeah. So I'm going to walk through these. I'm going to walk through kind of each of these steps a little bit. Remember again, kind of you're in the forever business. Also remember investment follows vision. If you can't paint a vision for someone, you're probably not going to be successful. So figure out what that finish line looks like and what success looks like for you and your community. It's not hard and fast. I mean, once you create the vision, be flexible. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, but at least be able to articulate what it is that you want and what success means. Because I think one of the frustrating things I've worked with, and I know most of the developers, I mean, I'm still friends with them, a lot of the developers that I've worked with. And they'll tell you one of the most frustrating things is they come into a community, you go out and want to do an RFP or you invite them in to talk or something, and then they say, what do you want us to do? And they say, I don't know, we just want a developer to put it, right? That'll forget it. They'll never return your call again. If you could come in and say, we've got, in the case I brought up, we're like, we have this property, this is what we're doing, this is what we'd like to see, and this is the kind of developer that we're looking for. They're like, okay, and we'll be supportive when you get to permitting. And you're nodding your head, so I'm wondering if you've been a developer, but
I've worked on other projects and brought this up because it's like the St. Clair to me anyway, in my experience. Thing. Developing a plan because developing properties are extremely risky. To any extent you can reduce that risk by showing the developer you've got your P's together, you've got yourself far along the path of attracting somebody you really want to work with.
I should invite you up. What he said is exactly correct. I agree. It is a risk development, as I said before, it's a risky business, and to the extent you can really what it is with a developer, if you're going to work with a developer, they want a partner that's going to be there when something goes sideways. Because I will tell you, I've been through no development project I've ever been through hasn't gone sideways at some point. Something's going to happen. You'll find, we're doing the affordable housing project I told you about. It's a brownfield hospital demo, and the contractor put all the debris into the basement and packed the basement. So now structurally we have to dig it all out because we can't put foundations on it. You can't plan for that until you put a shovel in the ground. So making sure you're kind of anticipate you're there, you're not going to kind of back out when things get bad. It's important. And so to the extent that you can kind of articulate that at the front end is really important.
Back on that slide, for you Main Street folks out there, these are your reinvestment stats that you have to report to National Main Street Center for certification. So how many jobs created, residential units created, blight elimination, affordable units created. So those are different goals, and making sure, that you're articulating which of those is most important is also a key thing. And Michael mentioned this on a project later as well, how that ties in.
So the next step is kind of, know your market. And the other thing too, if you are working with a developer, there's nothing worse than when a developer comes in and you say, we want to build a 20,000 square feet of commercial in a market that maybe could absorb 3 over a year, right? Or we want to do, housing, and we want to do 200 units of multifamily or whatever. And, our market, last year we only absorbed 15 or something. So understand what your market can bear and be realistic about it. It's easy to get discouraged at this step, especially if you're in a community that's struggling, and you look at it and you say, nothing's going to work, and we're really frustrated because sometimes, I brought up earlier, sometimes you can rely, if you're lucky enough to have a community that's robust enough, that you have a strong developer community that you can work with. But sometimes you have to be your own developer, and sometimes you have to find that pump and prove that the market is there. One thing I would say, developers are copycats. If something works, they're going to copy it. I did a project for the Laramie. I'll talk a little bit about the Laramie Main Street Alliance for our clients. I helped them. They acted as their own developer, and we'll go through that. So we'll go through that case study. But they did 3 units of upper story housing in their downtown for market rate. They had low cost, I would consider it low cost housing, not affordable, it's cheap housing, I think. And all of a sudden, the property owners are like, wait a minute, you're getting what for your second floor? Or, okay, well, how'd you do that? I want to do that. I'm going to go to the bank. And the bank's going to say, you know, look, I want to do what the Laramie Main Street Alliance did. So that process. So sometimes I think you'd be surprised when you start to get investment, how much investment begets further investment. And I'll kind of go through that a little bit. But there's a couple different areas you can kind of check in. LoopNet, it's a free site just for commercial property. Craigslist, I mentioned property management companies. Also, real estate development professionals. I was the best friend when I worked was commercial real estate brokers. Get to know them, go meet them. They are the ones who know, they're the frontline real estate people in your community. They know who's buying, who's selling, who's leasing. They know everything about your market that you want to know. Pick their brain. Your success is their success, so they'll talk with you. You know, if you don't, sometimes, I mean, a lot of the smaller communities, a lot of residential brokers kind of play both commercial and so just find out who those people are, go talk to them. You'll learn a ton of information, and you'll get the information that you can plug in to my elegant spreadsheet, which I'll go over a little bit later. Your development team, I talked about banks already a little bit, but developers have teams. You should have it. No different if you're going to act as a developer. Have an architect, and I know the statewide Main Street has an architect on staff that you can tap into to help with that. Let me ask, are there any architects in the audience? Okay, I'll be mostly nice. One thing about architects, and I like them, I think they're wonderful, creative people. They don't drive, you are the project manager, not the architect. And I think I've worked with enough architects and they'll tell you, you have to do this, you have to do it, you have to do it. You don't always have to. They want they want to push a little bit. That's okay. But just understand when you're working, you're the project manager, you have to manage costs. Sometimes there are things that they want to do that may be outside of your budget, but just keep that in mind. When it comes to be mindful of life safety issues and accessibility. Those are the two things really have to keep in mind. But a lot of the other stuff, remember, you're the project manager, not the architect. And my apologies to the two architects. You can scold me afterward. Attorneys, obviously, you need, you're going to put together development deals, you're going to be closing, you do all kinds of stuff. You're going to want a good attorney. Real estate brokers, obviously, I talked about that, and general contractors too. I haven't talked to that yet, but when you're thinking about how much things are going to cost, talk to a general contractor, and I guarantee they will talk to you because they know if you can generate work, they're going to benefit. So they'll come and you can ask them, how much does it cost per square foot? I mean, they'll give you back of the napkin. Usually it's fairly conservative, but that's okay at the stage you're at. But talk to them because they're the ones that are going to be doing the work. They're going to be hiring the subcontractors. They'll tell you what the problems are. And usually, in my experience with general contractors, they don't hold back and they're very direct. And that's a good thing. So make sure cultivate those relationships and kind of tap into them, help gather the information that you're going to need to kind of build out your project. So
yeah, so we're curious, mostly for our understanding of communities and networks, which of those 5 groups you are confident that you could basically say, I have somebody in mind and I can call tomorrow. One of our architects is Megan. She's awesome. She's got great historic experience. She's also done a lot of work on brownfields. We've got a couple attorneys that we're regularly working with. Contractors depend on the region, but just curious as to the team and which of those feels like the most mysterious gap for you all. Are there any areas where you're like, yeah, I don't know commercial brokers, or we don't have commercial brokers? A lot of small and rural communities don't necessarily have a great real estate network. So it's looking pretty well spread across the board. So awesome. Any of those that you all feel are a little bit mysterious at this point? Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, thanks, but what about CDFIs, those pros, cons, a lot of us in rural communities.
Yeah, no, that's a good, I kind of use banks very generically as kind of your financing institutions. I know, I'm sorry. You're absolutely correct. I mean, I think, when we talk about banks, we really talk about, I'm really talking more of your financial resources. So the CDFI, the Community Development Finance Institution, the lender, there are other lenders that aren't necessarily traditional banks that can be helpful. I know, and even land banking organizations, there's different ways you can do it, but know who they are and know how you can plug them in and figure out how you can put them in to your capital stack. Yes, go ahead.
I'm also curious where both the removal project and yeah, there's a lot about.
You know, that's a good question. Your risk management. I do think, I don't know, Matt, have you experienced the?
I haven't, but you know, certainly it's part of the assessment process and probably worth us mentioning in the next iteration. So.
One is,
And you come up with the lawyers and
Good point.
I once helped buy a building from Hewlett Packard, so I could share, get a few things with me later, share some stuff.
Mike, I do want to do a time check. We're about halfway through, so
Okay.
just
Cool. And we'll, so the other thing too is I think Ben and I will hang out a little bit afterward if you have some follow-up questions around for public as well. So if you want to have any additional questions. So start your evaluation. Next step. You know, you got your market, you got your vision, you kind of look at the market, it's consistent with the market. So start your evaluation. One thing, and if there's one thing and one thing only that I leave you with today, it's this. If you control the real estate, you control your future. Please take it, repeat it, use it. Everything I'm talking about after that, if you don't control the real estate, is an academic exercise. And so I think keep in mind, I mean, when you're looking at that building, before you get so far in the kind of visioning and planning and dreaming about what it could be, figure out how can you get control of it. And it doesn't have to be buying it. You can get it under contract. You can do other ways to get control of it, but focus on getting control of the real estate. As Main Street people, as city people, municipal people, when you control the real estate, you control that future. You can plan and figure out what it's going to be at the end of the day. So really kind of keep that in mind. The other thing, and this is my editorial commentary, the thing that drives me crazy working with communities, when you say they look at properties as a liability, not an asset, and it drives me crazy. You know, oh, we have to buy that. Well, what are we going to? We don't want to sell it right away. We're going to get rid of it. No, it's an tangible asset. You know, you go spend grant money on people like Matt and I. We'll give you a plan, walk away, and then you buy a property. The property has intrinsic value. It will always have value. So you can, if you go back to your city council and they say, we want to take it up, say Mike at this conference said you're crazy. You control the real estate, control your future, buy the property. So don't be afraid to wade into that. I mean, there's structures, I won't get into the weeds on it. You can set up nonprofits and work with different entities that start manage ownership if there's liability issues and stuff. But don't be afraid to get in and control the real estate. It's a big thing. And then kind of just go through, ask yourself, you know, is it historic? Is it an eyesore? Are there environmental concerns? You know, what are the issues? Where can we tap into resources? You know, is it historic? We had a great tour last night of Wheeling. Just amazing stuff that's happening. I was just so impressed with how they're leveraging all the historic tax credits, the federal and state, and they're layering that with facade grants and other incentives. It's just so amazing to see that happening and some of the cool things, the transformation that's starting to take place. And so, you know, when you ask yourself, what are the big issues, I think that'll help guide you to where the resources might be. You know, Matt talked about with the environmental, the brownfield, being able to apply the brownfield funding, you know, and kind of think through those. The other thing too is land use and zoning. We do a lot of the land use and zoning as well. We work with communities, and nothing will frustrate a developer more or anyone like me if you have a vision and you have a code that is inconsistent with that vision. We want mixed use and we want this or we want residential, but your code says you can't do that. So keep in mind when you're building that vision, you may have to adjust your code, or you may have to adjust your vision to fit the code, but just keep in mind that will drive a developer up a tree and run from your community kicking and screaming if your land use is not consistent with the vision that you're putting forward. So just keep that in mind. Because we don't always, I mean, we don't always talk to, you know, the planning people in the city department sometimes. So just, you know, keep them in your speed dial. So getting into kind of, we're going to start thinking, you know, more like a developer. You know, for the Main Street folks among us, the historic preservation folks among us, we go and we look at these, you know, I do it. I've been doing, I go in and wheeling. I'm like, that's a cool building. I'd like to buy that. It's a gorgeous, like, buy. We buy buildings, right? We're nostalgic, historic preservation, Main Street people. Developers buy income. They don't buy buildings. They buy income. Remember that. Think about that when you're looking at these projects and you're contemplating them. Don't look at it like a building. Look at it as an opportunity to generate income, because that's how a developer is going to look at it. That's how you get financing. That's how you can kind of get the project going forward. So just thinking, just going to take kind of an example of 3,000 square foot building. If you have a lease rate, and generally I'm just using kind of commercial lease rates, which are done as a per square foot on an annual basis. If I get, you know, $5 a square foot, you get $15,000 a year in that 3,000 square foot space. If I'm getting, you know, if I'm in a hip college town or somewhere in urban market or where you're getting $40 a square foot, you know, you're getting 120,000 in income. Where do you think the investment in the building? Which building do you think is going to get more investment? Right? It's simple. Income, you know, it's important and it's going to drive investment. When I started in the community I was telling you about that I worked in, our lease rates were $3 to $6 a square foot. In the city count, and this kind of maybe to your opportunity cost question, the city councilor said, how do you know when we're going to be done? You know, you want to come in, you want to spend all the public money. It's a very conservative city council, and they said, well, how do you want to spend all this money? How do you know when you're done? I said, well, when we get to $21 a square foot lease rate, then I think my market will work and I'm happy. And when I left after I did the big project, we were $22 a square foot. And I decided to leave before they went back and fired me. It's great, now get out of here. But I'll go through these really quickly. So again, you know, retail sales impact kind of income and they impact lease rates. So thinking about, okay, this is more for kind of the Main Street folks. When you're doing events, when you're doing marketing, what you're wanting to do is drive sales. You know, you want to drive sales because if you can drive sales, you're driving income because you can charge a higher rent. In this instance, if you have just say a restaurant, this is kind of an example. 3,000. It's a little big for restaurants at 3,000 square feet, but if you get $600 a square foot in sales at a restaurant, you're going to generate $1.8 million a year in sales. Generally, for restaurants, and this is just a rule of thumb, about 6% of it is occupancy. So you've got 108,000 a year to spend, and that includes your rent, utilities, stuff like that. So it's not exactly 9,000 a month. But if you've got 9,000 a month, you pay higher rent. If you're getting a higher rent, if I'm the building owner, I'm going to keep that building in good shape because I want to lease it for a higher amount, so I'm going to make more money. So let me skip through these really quick. So this is just, again, developers, you know, developers buy income, not build it. This is kind of the cycle that you want in your community. You know, lease rates drive income, income drives investment. You know, developers are buying income, drives investment, sales and demand, residential demand. You know, retail is kind of up now, but commercial office drives demand. So you know, if you're getting office use, you're getting, you know, residential use, that's going to drive your lease rates and your income. And again, that's kind of the cycle, the ideal that you're in the project. So let me pause. How are we doing on time?
We're good. About 10 minutes to wrap up with 15 minutes Q&A.
I'm going to shift gears now and talk about the financial analysis. I'm going to use the example. It was the project I did for the Laramie Main Street. They were the Great American Main Street a couple of years ago. They're wonderful, dynamic kind of executive director, Tricia, which is amazing. She hired us to come in and do kind of a preliminary analysis of this. They own the building. I think it was a long story because it burned down and it was over like the course of 25 years. And they had the third floor was vacant. They a co-op grocery came in on the first floor and they didn't have enough money to finish it, so it's sat vacant for a couple of years. And they brought us in to figure out, okay, how do we get it? How do we get some residential units at the upper floor? So I'm going to talk about kind of how we went about it, how it translates to that financial analysis. Again, we have the spreadsheets are they're for you on the thumb drive and they'll be available. So if you have these projects, you can start plugging in. I really hope that you take what we're saying, go back to your community, start plugging in numbers and figuring out what's happening economically. I was really happy. I was at a conference about 6 months ago, and this woman came like running across the room to like grab me, and she's like, "Oh my God, I was in your presentation like 8 years ago, and you gave me a spreadsheet, and I still use it today." And I was like, "Oh," so it warmed my heart. So I hope I hope you can get as much value out of it as they did. So really quick spreadsheet. There's 4 sheets. The first 2 sheets, the hard cost and total development cost, that's your cost. That's how much you're estimating what it's going to cost to do the project. Either redevelop, develop it, acquire the building, your cost of labor, your general contractor, your architect, all your soft costs. The operating statement is your revenue. So you say, okay, remember your income, your buying income. How much income am I going to derive from this project? Is it about you're thinking like a developer? And then sources and uses takes the two and marries them together. So you've got your cost, and then you got your revenue, and how do they fit, and what's your gap, and what's the hill you got to climb to make it work. So that's how it's broken down, and they're all kind of linked together to formulas and such. So to help out. So the first, your hard cost worksheet. Hard cost construction materials and the labor to kind of put it together. So it includes acquisition. It includes any demolition and abatement. This is, again, you talk to your contractors, you talk to the EPA folks that you work with, your grant, you go out, you do your assessment, and you say, we've got asbestos, it's going to cost $100,000 to abate it and demolish it, plug the number in, off and running. And then, of course, acquisition. If you want to buy the building, control the real estate, control your future, you plug the numbers in there. Construction cost varies. Everyone's like, what do I plug in? What do I plug in? When I started doing this, I'd say it started somewhere between $25 and $75 a square foot. Now I'm at 150. Inflation's lovely.
And a good source for some of that information is your local building official. They can start to tell you what they're seeing in the marketplace. So if you want to use that as a touch point, that can help you to be able to get that number, as well as contractors.
Yeah, and the one thing I when you're doing this, there's no magic to like at this stage. I mean, I always equate it, it's like you're grading an estimate. You're probably at like a D level. And the goal is as you move forward and you get better numbers, get to an A level. An A level is like when you've got the contractor locked in, you've got the estimates locked in, you've got everything, then you plug it in. There's a project I was working on, the affordable housing. I'm on like the 17th version of this as we go through. So it's intended to be dynamic and kind of, it'll change over time. We'll explain a little why. So but think about plugging in a number. The more challenges you have, the higher that 150, dollars the square foot number is going to be. If you've got, if you're doing new construction, that's a little bit different. But if you're going from office to residential, it's going to be a little more expensive and stuff like that. If you want any more insight, talk to me afterwards.
Mike, on this example, this is tenant finish only, correct?
Yeah, this is just a tenant finish. It's not new construction.
Why that number may seem low.
Yeah, and I think there are you can play around with the spreadsheet to add in kind of utility site costs. It's intended to start out very simple, but when you take it, if you want to play around with it and add different things, feel free to not. It's really for you to kind of use. Soft costs are generally, so this is the total development cost. You pull over all the hard costs, the acquisition, demolition, abatement, the construction, and then you factor in kind of your contractor's costs, your soft cost, the architect, the engineering, you're going to have financing fees. I think we do the one, it's like 1% kind of origination fee, stuff like that. You want to make sure you plug in some of those costs. And, professional fees, your architect or engineers are going to be about 7.5% roughly of your total development cost. Developer fee. This is a big one. If you haven't worked in development before, you can take it. If you act as your own developer, take a developer fee. Don't be like, you can't take money because this is a developer once told me, he said, Mike, he goes, that's our keep the lights on money. So we need that. That's a little bit of the profit, but it's also some of the helps, with finance some of the staff and things you have to use, you have to pay for during construction. One thing about developer fee, if you're going after a grant and it has a cash match, take a developer fee, little trick, say 12%. A lot of times there's some we work with, you can do a 12% developer fee. Then you defer 60% of it or 4% of it back, and that becomes your cash. So you don't have to necessarily put a check. So there are little things you can play around with to kind of help when you're thinking about doing these development projects. And again, contingencies based on unknowns. When you're starting, plug in 10, 15% starting. But again, as you get to the C level, B level estimates, you can bring that contingency down. I usually start at 10 to 15%. By the time we're in construction, it'll be 2.5% to 5%, depending on, if we've got the contractor locked in, if we've got a lot of that stuff set aside, but you always want to have at least some contingency. Then the operating statement. This is your estimate of future revenue. Again, like I said before, when you're testing your market, when you're going out, like if we built a residential unit, what could we rent it for? When we did the Laramie example, this was right as COVID, just before COVID hit. I helped them. I did this analysis for them, and we estimated $850 a month per unit for about 1,100 square foot, 1-bedroom unit. By the time we rented it out, it was 1,400. We started in like late 2019, early 2020. The first units were delivered September 1st, 2022, and I think the market just changed. Housing, COVID, did a lot of weird things in the world, and we got 1,400, and probably could have tried. Just because there was such a blatant demand for market rate in a downtown. One thing I'll tell you, you work in the downtown environment. I've worked in every community, large, small. There is demand for upper floor housing, regardless. It amazes me, no matter, it could be the smallest town, you have upper floor, you'll have people knocking on your door wanting to rent. It's an amazing thing I think about downtown. So vacancy rates, you'll need to plug in. Obviously, you can play around with it. If you're a little more certain, if the market's like, yeah, we're pretty strong, plug in 5%. But you're always going to have something the banks will require at home expected. And so you'll need to have a vacancy loss amount. And then your net up, once you go through back out your expenses, there's a little bit of information in the spreadsheet about what each of the expenses represents and what they are. Explains about 10%. You'll back out in expenses and you'll end up with a net operating income of, in this case, we had about 65,000. Divided that by our debt coverage ratio, which is our amount of debt coverage. Debt coverage ratio, if you're looking at, the bank wants to see that you have about $1.25 in revenue for every dollar you're going to put towards servicing your debt. Is I think the easiest way to think about it. So when you think about how much you're going to have available for debt, we derived about 52,000, and that leaves, but you left with a net cash flow. So in the case of the Main Street Alliance, and I think if you're a Main Street, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a community and you don't have a robust development and you want to be your own developer, keep in mind the other benefit to something like this. If you could do this approach successfully, you create your own fiscal sustainability for your organization. And everybody talks like shop local Saturday. It's great, and I'm all a big fan of it. But develop local too is a big thing because you keep your money local. And if you're an organization like Laramie Main Street Alliance, they're actually, because we're charging higher rents, they get about $20,000 a year in income. Do anything, they pay staff, they do whatever. Once the debt is serviced, then they'll get about 50,000. It'll be just money.
And Mike, just with that relationship with their annual budget. So Great American Main Street, one of the best Main Street programs in the country, they get $40,000 from the city as their annual operating income. The rest of it they have to scrabble for and scrape for. So for them to be able to eventually generate $50,000 on their own, they're basically supplementing their annual budget significantly by this project. So providing them with financial security and sustainability moving forward.
And it works outside of the Main Street profits too. If you have other nonprofits, and you think about how you can structure it. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily be a Main Street. But the sources and uses, this is the fourth tab of the sheet on the spreadsheet. This brings together the both the income and the rev, or the income and the cost. Equity is critical. You can use your land if you're doing a project. By the way, let me mention one thing. If you're doing a kind of a ground up, if you're doing like a for sale, I do this as kind of contemplating lease, residential and commercial lease. But if you're doing a for sale product, you can send me an email because I've got a spreadsheet that contemplates for sales a little bit of it translates a little different in income. But I've got a spreadsheet that I have for that. I can send you if you want to play around with that approach. Equity is critical. You probably have to do appraisal again, you budget, that's in your spreadsheet. Make sure the developer is putting some equity. If you're working with a developer, let me say, if you're working with a developer and they come to you and they want some public participation, some contribution, however, grants, historic tax credits, you as the public become an equity investor. You as an equity investor have the right to ask that developer for their proforma and their financials. If they tell you no, what I would tell you is don't work with them. Don't work with them because they're hiding. You want to work on a level of trust. And if you're an equity investor on that, and somebody says, "Oh, invest $1 million of your own money," and the developer says, "Oh, I'm not going to show you the proforma or whatever," are you going to invest that money? I mean, as an individually, probably not. I mean, I wouldn't. So as a public entity, ask to see their financials. Look, what is the developer fee they're taking? The one thing developers make money by spending other people's money. They want to spend your money first. Okay, I'm not offended. I don't hate that. Developers are my friends. It's a wonderful thing. It's a risky thing. I don't have anything, but just make sure when you go in, you get their financials and they can justify those expenses and they make sense. Like the developer fee, are they overcharging for professional fees or different things like that? There's little tricks they get away, so just keep that in mind. And in this case, with the Main Street Alliance, we were able to loan. We took out a loan for $583,000. It was a 3.95 in a 15-year term, and we were able to service that. Actually, she's paying now. She still wants to get it done. She's taking all the income and she's paying down the loan, which is what she can do, which is great for that with those resources. But one of the things too, when you're contemplating these projects, you're thinking about them. When we started, the construction costs were not nearly what they were. So we started in late 2019, 2020. We had one idea of what the construction was going to be. We didn't anticipate that inflation was going to go and drive with COVID, lumber, anything you had to import was a nightmare. And at one point, they said, we had to delay it a little bit and we to see if we could bring the construction costs down. But they were saying, well, why don't we wait? We should wait, construction costs down. But then we waited, and that 3.95% is probably 7.5%. Just keep in mind when you're going forward, if you struggle with construction costs, just because waiting is not always, there's always something else you're gonna have to deal with. So to the extent you could just kind of deal with it in the moment and go forward, think about that a little bit more. A delay is, I always say, when you work with a developer, time is money. I work in the public sector, so as much as me. When you work in the public sector, time is time. When you work for a developer, time is money. So just try to think about it in those terms a little bit. But it's set up so that when you go through the spreadsheet, it kicks out the amount of income you'll be able to derive from the project, and it'll kind of give you amount, like a max amount that you could probably loan that the project could bear based on the project. And you could play around again. You go talk to your bank, and the bank says, "Well, hey, we want your business, so we'll give you 6.25 over 20 with a 10-year balloon, whatever." You go talk to the bank, and you can plug in those interest rates, and it'll calculate that for you, and you can kind of get an idea of where your project is. So again, that's the sources and uses. There's also I included in there is a sheet of cash flow statement too, so it'll project that cash flow and loan payments and stuff like that over time. So I'm going to go through these last ones really quick, just in the interest of time. Cap rates is a term you hear. It's just a way of deriving income or deriving the value of the building on completion or value of the project on completion based on income. Again, so this was, I did the North Dakota state, and I told it was a good example, so I use it. So net operating income, remember we pointed in that spreadsheet, this is just a dollar. It's not a great, I'm sorry, it's a dollar general. It's not the best example, sexiest example, but they show a net operating income 84,000. They divided that by the cap rate. So cap rate, you take your net operating income, you divide it by the cap rate, and then you get an estimate of the value of the project. Well, I will just tell you, if you do get into this at this level, there's no magic with cap rates. It's not a perfect or scientific number. It's a little counterintuitive because the higher the cap rate, the riskier the project. So in this case, it's 5.7. It's a tenant, a national credit tenant. They've got a 15-year lease, so a 5% cap rate is pretty low. Usually, the market's really strong. I think you go 4 or 5%, but usually you'll be at 7. It's riskier. They'll push it up to 10. But anyway, it's just a formula for you to quickly kind of understand what the value of your building will be when it's completed based on the income. This is again, the example, Laramie, we had to do an appraisal. The appraiser did it at 965 based on our income. That's about a 7% cap rate. We loaned 584,000 roughly. So is the other thing you have to keep in mind, the bank's not going to loan more than the value of the building. So, just keep that in mind when you're factoring in some of these considerations. If the building's not worth, more than the loan, the bank's only going to loan you so much. And 75% is about the rule of thumb. So just to kind of close up, when you get to a project, and you've convinced your boards, you've convinced your councils, you put everything together, you go through it, you do your first run, the financial analysis, and you've got a gap. And then, of course, what happens is I had an old boss who she's like, it's the meet people. Betsy, the meet people come out, and I can't do anything, can't do it. So that just, I don't say to ignore those people. Understand what they're, it's an inherently risk averse. But think about how you can kind of overcome that gap. Like, can you phase the project? Can you change the scope of the project? I mean, one thing to keep in mind when you change the scope, every project that I've ever done where we changed the scope or reduced it, afterward I've regretted and wished we figured out a way to finance it. Start to take things away. You're in the forever business. You take something away, you're taking it away forever. And so I did a historic theater, and I still go through it. My wife gets crazy because we go and I point out all the things I wish I'd done differently, but we cut because of budget. So just keep that in mind. Seek other funding if you have to. I mean, try to leverage as much. Again, as developers make money by spending other people's money. So should you. Get as much grant money as you can to help make that work. So, and again, control the real estate, you control your future. So here are just some of the takeaways. Some of the stuff I won't repeat them, but these are kind of my micism. We'll open up for questions, but I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something. Spreadsheets up here, talk to us, and questions.
I just have
I just want to say that I agree with you on purchasing. That's the first step. Most important step is to have control over the real estate. It's also like 100 things that you need to do when you can do that, especially in a nonprofit. If you don't have the financial history, so I know there's like partnerships, but don't want to make it sound like easy. Just buy it. Like there's a lot that goes.
Oh, I hope I didn't give you the exact. No, but I agree with you, and we work in a lot of, one of our niches, we work in a lot of smaller rural communities, and capacity is a big issue. I mean, a lot of it is, I'm doing a housing project now in a community, a rural community in Colorado, where the town staff is the town clerk and the public works clerk. And she has her degree in theater management. And she's great, she wants to do housing, so it's a steep learning curve for her. But the town went and bought a big chunk of property, they bought it, they had surplus property. Because the other thing too, if your community has surplus property, they're like, oh, just get rid of it, get rid of this lot, don't let them do it, you know, the market, what are those opportunities? But your point is well taken, I mean, it does go in there. I think the extent that you can understand your market, be prepared, will allow you to and also, I want you to go out and be confident in talking to developers or investors if you're fortunate enough to have that.
So Mike, we do need to repeat the questions for the online folks. So if you do have a question, I'll go ahead and repeat it. So
Anybody else? Y'all ready to go become developers and stuff?
We're ready.
question.
Emphasize your point about a lot of times in smaller communities, the developer comes in and everybody gets really excited. And the developer says, well, you got to do X, Y, and Z. Oh, that's whatever you need, whatever you need. It's actually dangerous. Not all developers are, well, some of them are, but the risk is high, the margins can be low. They're going to look for any advantage someone's money other than their own. So it's really important that you get with somebody who understands development, like these fine gentlemen, someone like them, that can guide you along those lines. Don't have the background with yourself. Remember, you own the site, you are in control. You do have power. You don't get railroaded by a developer that wants more than you have to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hope if everybody heard what the gentleman said, especially I will say in smaller communities, sometimes it's like any developer that comes is a great developer, and it's not the case. And sometimes I think that's why we really push it as how to be your own developer. Because again, if you keep money local, or you can be your own developer, I think it could be a really winning model. But also like not understand how the financial stuff works so you don't get into by developers that they'll want that. The other thing, and I'm going to build off that a little bit of a different direction. RFPs, my editorial commentary, RFPs are not a good approach for developers. Here's why. A good developer is business. A good developer is not going to respond to your RFP if they've got plenty. Developers that respond to your RFP are the ones that generally don't have a lot of work. So it's not hard and fast to change. And if you have some unique properties, I think there's one in Wheeling that's really cool where you've got like there are things that we were change that, but don't rely. I'm just saying, don't rely on RFPs. They're not a good way to recruit developers. Developers don't work on RFPs. They don't. One said, Mike, I don't want to be part of your team. Said that to the like, okay. And he goes, because I go through, I don't want to compete with them. If you want me to be your developer, I'll be your developer, but don't. I got plenty of other stuff I'm going to work on. So here's just a suggestion. You're in a community, and you are thinking you want to do an RFP, or instead of doing an RFP, go out and talk to your Main Street people, talk to whomever, and say, what are the projects that have been done in communities like ours that we think are successful? And then call the developer up and say, hey, can we talk to you? Can you tell us what you did in that community? And I'll tell you, developers, because they're risk takers, have massive egos, and they love to talk to you. And they'll tell you, and then if they say, oh, well, what do you got in your community? Why? Oh, you got what? And say, what do you think would if we were going this route? And then you kind of like, it's like a little bit like fishing, you know, try to get them on the hook, and pull them in, pull them in, pull them in. And it's a little bit different, and it's kind of antithetic. I've been running afoul of a lot of first things in public sectors, but if you can kind of find a way to end run that a little bit, I have some suggestions. I think that RFP talk to me.
Any final questions? We're just about time.
You're telling me a bank, a loan that's not going to develop a project more than $75,000. If you need like $200,000.
No, it's not. It's the bank's not going to loan it to you based on what you paid for it. The bank's not going to loan it what it's worth when you're done.
Oh, I see. I got that.
Yeah. So what you do is take your lease rates, you take your whatever your commercial, plug it into the cap rate, get a value at the end, and then do your 75%.
That was considered a building that was good.
Well, you got the building, you got control of the real estate, so I think that's all. Yeah. Well, cool. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you got something from it. If again, we're going to make some of the information available on the conference website. There's a handful of kind of thumb drives that we got the spreadsheet. Again, some of it I locked some of the stuff, but if you really want to use it, call me and I can unlock or get you one to play around. Cool. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's.
All right. Good? Yeah, I think we did pretty well. So, folks, maybe they couldn't.
Yeah, I'm just gonna stop the recording here.
Oh,